Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. My name is Scott Morgan, out the Motor City Madmouth. Alongside of me again is our Thursday co-host, Stuart Hack. How you doing, Stu?
I'm doing great, Scott. I'm doing great.
And why don't you introduce our guest for the evening?
Okay, I'm proud to introduce. He was a friend of the old Hack Attack on Sports show, a blogger and an author, everything New York Mets. Welcome, Greg Prince. Greg, good to talk to you again.
Good to be back with you, Stu. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Greg. Glad to have you on board.
So I guess the first thing I would ask you, Greg, is how has your life been impacted since March?
In the context of what we're here to discuss, I haven't been to any baseball games lately. But putting that aside, because that doesn't make me any different from any other fan in this country. Personally, I'm doing okay. My family's doing okay. And, knock wood, we'll get through this, all of us together, I hope. And otherwise, as you guys well know, we got baseball back a month ago. There's certainly been some bumps in the road and a couple of pauses, but, we're here and the Mets are more or less here.
Did you get a cardboard cutout?
No, I decided I'm enough of a stick as it is. So I just thought I'd let that opportunity go by.
I went ahead and did it. I think I'm out in left field somewhere.
Okay, well, hopefully you are staying dry tonight, because I think it's raining over Citi Field, but I think these things are supposed to be waterproof, and they've already survived one tropical storm.
So, I mean, as you know, the Mets and Marlins canceled their game tonight, because of everything that was going on, the civil unrest. They did it a little differently. What were your thoughts on how they did it? And, basically the teams came on the field, did a 42-second moment of silence, and then walked off. What were your feelings about that?
Well, I think, given the fact that they were all in the ballpark, they took advantage of an opportunity to find a way to express their sorrow, express, what they felt is the urgency of the matter. And I thought it was well done. I think the fact that the players seem to have come up with it kind of from the ground up, as opposed to having it mandated by Major League Baseball or something like that, probably speaks well for everybody involved. I get the feeling that if they were aware of all of what was going on in professional sports yesterday, when the Milwaukee Bucks kind of started things rolling and NBA games were called off and several baseball games were called off, perhaps this would have happened yesterday, but things move fast. And, they got yesterday's game in, and then, we saw Dom Smith, really express himself after the game. And I think, once that happened, it was kind of hard to just say, okay, thanks for weighing in. See you tomorrow night for first pitch at 7:10. So I can understand, why the players were moved to do this, and why, they made figuratively speaking, a statement by taking the field, having those 42 seconds, as you said, and then departing.
Do you see this as something, obviously if more things happen in the country, things like this can happen again. Do you see this lingering on, or, basically been a lot of challenges this baseball season, and this is the latest one. Do you think everyone sits out a game and they kind of put it behind them and go on and play, or do you see other, maybe sit downs happening, whether it's, the Mets or any other team?
I think baseball and all sports, to a certain degree, are going to be guided by events. And, everybody has a schedule to keep, ideally. We know the length that goes through to make up games. We saw the other night how, they crammed a road game into a home game, and 5 games in 3 days this weekend at Yankee Stadium to make up for the games they lost when players tested positive. For something like this to have happened, it had to be, I think, pretty extraordinary beyond the already extraordinary parameters of this season. So I get the feeling that it won't be so much business as usual, because I don't think it can be. But I think they go back to playing by tomorrow, certainly. And, in a way, that's great for people who like to watch baseball, people who like to play baseball. But, I think it just goes to show you that in a way it feels like we're responding to the same issues that were roiling everything 2.5 months ago, almost 3 months ago. And there's a lot of talk then and a lot of symbolism. And here we are again. So I think there's only so much that can be done at the sports level. Hopefully on an internal basis, listening to the players talking after they left the field tonight, the conversations continue. The teamwork continues. I mean, only speaking as somebody who watches the Mets and then pays, puts close tabs on how they act and react. That this is a team that works together pretty well. We saw it last year. It manifested itself on the field. We read all the stories about, the Cookie Club, which sounds so innocent compared to what we're going through. But these are guys who seem to like each other, communicate with each other. And, there are still steps to take because they all come from different backgrounds, and maybe not everybody understands everybody else. And hopefully this kind of keeps the ball rolling. But just from a day-to-day, night-to-night process, I assume, and I don't know, but I assume everybody kind of gets back to playing ball, playing basketball, playing hockey, whatever. And, they're athletes. It's not, they can only do so much. I think the no pun intended, the ball is in the court of society to a certain degree here. But I think, when you have a platform like they have, you have the chance to do what you can. And I think they took it.
So just going to this bizarre, for lack of a better word, season, I'm going to throw this question out to both of you. I'm going to start with Scott.
Okay.
Are you watching the games differently this year with a different eye, a different feeling than you have in the past? Start with Scott.
To some extent. And the reason why I say that is I have the good fortune all the time to go on Marlins media availability calls and talk to Don Mattingly and be a part of his press conferences. So there's certain things I'll take out of those Zoom calls, all right, and then try to apply them to what I see on the field. So if you want to say I have a little bit of inside information or more to work with, yeah, to some extent. I mean, when you look at baseball differently, you guys have to understand that there's rule changes that are much differently. I know you want to get into those, but you've hit me with some pretty interesting questions, Stuart. Every time you hit me with an interesting question, where do you think I'm going with it, right? To the people that make the decisions, like Don Mattingly, the old perfect game. You get the drill. So yeah, I guess you could say when I watch them, I do it from an inside standpoint, from what I hear at the Zoom calls. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. And how about you, Greg? Do you have a different feeling watching the games this year?
Yeah, it's spooky, quite frankly. Your cardboard cutout, corrugated plastic cutout notwithstanding, it's very eerie watching games with nobody in the stands, even if I'm just watching at home. It's odd realizing that the broadcasters, unless the team is home, are not with the team. They're not in the same ballpark. So there's already kind of a distance to it. The fact that every shot of the dugout, you see the manager, coaches, players who aren't playing wearing masks, which you're glad to see. And in fact, you're sort of thrown off when they're not. But it reminds you of how odd it is to try to push this through in a year when experts are telling us, don't stand so close, to quote the police. And then this is before getting into, as Scott said, the rule changes and the oddities that have been implemented for better or worse. So feel to a certain degree, to a great degree, really, baseball is getting played because baseball feels it has to get played. And I can respect that. I love baseball. I think we all do here. But, it's also a reminder that this is a business and there are people who need to get paid, people who have television contracts, people who want to accrue service time. That's, on everybody. And hey, I'm turning the games on. It's not like I have reached, some sort of zen where I'm saying that, this is far too worldly for our concerns. It's baseball. So yeah, I'm watching it. And, when Jacob deGrom is on the mound and you're hoping that he can stay in another inning so you don't have to see Edwin Diaz too soon, or, when the Mets have the bases loaded and you're hoping that, somebody for a change can get a hit with runners in scoring position, that sort of thing, it feels like baseball for a few minutes. And that's a great feeling. We didn't have opening day. We didn't have spring in the sense that we know what spring means. We didn't. The Memorial Day weekend, the 4th of July, all of those things that we look to as milestones along the road that we're conditioned to for 162 games. That didn't exist in 2020. We understood why. So, when it shows up on July 24th, you try to wrap your arms around it and, you try to ride it as far as you can, and then, you hit a spot like you did last week, I guess it was. It's hard to keep track of time sometimes, where several games are called off, starting with the Mets and Marlins last week. And we've seen it with other teams. So it's odd, and it never really leaves your perception. At least doesn't leave mine. It's an odd season, unlike any season we've ever lived through. And knock wood, it's unlike any season we ever will live through.
Now, Scott alluded to some of the rule changes, and it's really for both of you again. Okay. Let's look ahead for a second to 2021. The universal DH, do you think a year from now we still have it, or we go back to where pitchers bat in the National League?
I think the universal DH doesn't come next year, but the year after. That's just my gut feeling. But it's inevitable. It is. Hey, Greg, I have a question I want to ask you while it's fresh in my mind, okay? And that's this. What are your thoughts of the remote broadcasters?
I've really only watched and listened to the Mets broadcast this year. It's one of the, I don't know exactly why, but I can't get myself interested in watching any other games. It's almost as if, I think partly because, we're only playing divisional games. So, the NL Central and the NL West, let alone the American League, practically doesn't exist in my mind. But I think they're doing the best they can. I mean, these are very good broadcasters who I'm used to listening to here on the Mets outlets. But it's, when Gary Cohn says of a home run at Fenway Park or Turner Field, it's out of here. And he's sitting in Citi Field. I find myself thinking, where is it out of? Exactly, even though I know, what he means. That they don't see the whole field. They're working off monitors.
Right.
And it's, to a certain degree, the coverage of those who write about the team and those who report about the team on radio or the sideline reporter, they're all compromised because they're not having those conversations. They're not up close. They're not observing anything. Every quote you read after a game is something that was said over Zoom,
right? That
you already heard if you're the type to stay tuned for post-game shows, as I am, because there just isn't that intimacy that I think makes a baseball season a baseball season. I'm probably going to end up saying this over and over again. You understand why you wouldn't tell people to risk their health to get a better quote from Pete Alonso or whoever.
Right.
But, it's what, again, that's the thing, though. This is a TV show. Right. And, to a certain degree, I suppose, a radio show. But it's, it's not a baseball season that we know how to embrace. That, it's going on, it happens to be televised. It's going on so it can be televised. And so we have something to watch, and people can sell commercials against it. So, again, to answer your question, I think they're doing an okay job. I'm able to follow the games. I mean, I watched a little bit of the KBO when that first came on,
right,
and got the idea of what it was like to watch baseball being discussed from remote locations, although, it wasn't like the ESPN guys were really that worried about doing play-by-play for teams you've never heard of and mostly players you've never heard of. So, again, I think everybody's making it up as they go along, and I'm willing to cut everybody a lot of slack.
Yeah, well,
as far as the DH, I just wanted to, as far as the DH, yeah, I get the feeling it's going to be tough to shake it off. I know it's not on the books for the National League next year. I can't imagine that they're going to say, okay, after a year where we enjoyed this offensive production, where we used our pitchers a certain way, that we're going to tell everybody to go back for 1 year. I'm now that I've lived with the DH after being a lifelong opponent of it, virulently so, I still don't like it. I guess I have no idea who's up, but just the natural rhythms of a pitcher batting ninth and getting into the game. Well, that's something we always talked about. It's cliche, but the strategy, I miss it. And the other part that to me is just odd. It feels like two different games are going on. It's like, okay, we had the half inning where the team batted, and it doesn't feel like there's a natural flow to the fact that Jacob deGrom or Steven Matz, whoever, he just batted, or his turn is coming up, he's going out for one more inning. Just feels like, okay, you guys go have your pitching game now. But I get the feeling it's here to stay, because I just think it was, like you said, it was inevitable anyway. I think it was coming around. We know that every other league in the world has been using it, basically. So it's here.
What about the rule in extra innings when they put the man on second to start the inning? Do you think that has any legs to it in the future?
I guess that like the 7-inning doubleheaders was supposed to cut down on time, cut down on players and coaches sticking around the ballpark and being too close to one another. But it doesn't seem like, maybe there hasn't been a 19-inning game this year yet, but it doesn't really feel like we're cutting down on how long it takes to play baseball games. So unless somebody's had statistics showing they're really benefiting from it, it just feels like a gimmick. And again, if you want to just chalk everything up to 2020 being a testing ground because we had to do it, okay, we're testing it. The Mets have only played one extra inning game thus far this year, and I think they were kind of worked over by the man on second, at least in terms of the other team. The Braves in this case had it, and they immediately scored, so I wasn't too fond of it. But again, anything that just doesn't feel akin to the rhythms of baseball just seem like such an outlier, and I've yet to feel that any of this stuff is improving the game. But again, who knows? Maybe they will say, look at StatCast, look at how much better it is that a runner is on second, and how great it is that we only play 7-inning doubleheaders, and you never know. I would hope that we could just pretend this whole season never happened.
Hey, Stuart, let me go over a quote that Don Mattingly gave me a couple of days ago about the universal DH, okay? And he was asked whether he enjoys managing in the NL with this. He says he does actually like it in this type of season. It allows him to give a guy a rest, and it sets up more guys in the lineup, and it's an equal playing field in the lineup, so it's easier to manage, and he doesn't have to use as many players, and his pitching staff, he's not really worried about the pitcher coming up to the plate. So, again, granted, he played in the American League his entire career. He managed with the Dodgers. Of course, now he's managing with Miami. So he's warming up to it a lot more. And, there doesn't have to do as many double switches and whatnot. So the universal DH.
But you can make the argument that that's what makes baseball what it is, all the different strategies and, trying to get your roster, getting the pitchers in, making sure they have enough rest, that you don't overuse anyone. There's a lot of intricacies of the game that maybe you're not getting if you're using a DH.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I like watching the pitcher hit. Well, I grew up, even though being a native of Metro Detroit, we lost the pitchers hitting back in the 70s when it first started anyway. So, but, so I've always liked watching the pitcher help his own cause, as they call it. You know what I mean? But the reality is in Detroit, the only time I've ever seen our pitchers hit is when they played in the National League Park. But, Don Mattingly, remember, he's managing, not us. You follow me? And he's the one who has to worry about all these guys getting hurt, the extra wear and tear at the plate and all that. And again, we all know 2020 is a weird year anyhow. And, and Greg, I'm glad you brought up the KBO. Thank you very much. I was watching the Korea Baseball Organization, and to me, it was interesting to see how the game was played. You know full well the ESPN staff didn't know anything about the players except what they had handed in front of them. But, I enjoyed watching the Korea Baseball Organization. I really, really did. And don't kid yourself, they've had a lot of good players that have actually gone on to the ML major leagues. I know, not to get way off subject, but Eric Thames was productive, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other ones that have gone and made the transition. So, but
yeah.
The universal DH, you guys are dead on. There's no way you're ever going to see the second man at second base after this year at all. I mean, everybody's laughing at it. Nobody can stand it. For this type of year, you're right, Greg. They are testing it out. But what are your thoughts about the 3-batter rule?
Again, I think that you're just kind of forcing something that didn't need to be forced. I understand especially in September, which is not an issue this year. This is one of the changes they were going to make anyway, limiting the number of call-ups and those dreadful, 15-man pitching staffs, which I guess you've had this year actually, but the one batter and out. But the so-called loogie was kind of being phased out as it was, so it just doesn't quite feel right if you bring in a reliever and he can't get out, gives up 3-run homer or something, or he's walked 2 guys, let's say, in his first 2 batters. Now you can't take him out because he has to face 3 batters. That just seems to be putting an artificial obstacle on managers. I don't know that with any of this stuff that there's any going back. It seems as if a rule comes into play, suddenly it's here. Remember, the DH is an experiment for 3 years, and it is now sadly the norm. I don't love the 3-batter rule. I don't think it really solves anything, but I haven't. I guess I've only seen it really come into play a few times in what is, to this point, been about a 30-game season, and I've rolled my eyes at it a couple of times in practice as much as in theory. So I don't think that that's really. These games are dragging on as it is, so I don't see where this is saving any time.
Yeah, the only thing I can say about the 3-batter rule, it almost brings us back to yesteryear when relievers used to pitch 2-3 innings anyway, so why would 3 batters be a big deal? So you're almost trying to force people back to the past to some extent. But, again, I don't know what a big difference. One thing I also want to mention, Stuart, if I may, all right? And that's a 7-inning rule. Don Mattingly in his on the Zoom call says he doesn't like the 7 innings DH. He says you end up making a run and then you're out of time. So it doesn't seem like it's a full game to him. He understands it for this type of year. So in other words, baseball is considered a non-time sport, but you have the 7-inning rule, and everybody knows you wait for the 8th and the 9th inning to hopefully wear them down. It's almost like a 15-round fight versus a 12-round fight in boxing, although understood the need for doing that, considering the differences of sports. So, again, we've always known games to be 9 innings. Again, you guys have said it time and time again, different year, got to try different stuff. But I think the man on second base is a one-and-done rule. That's as experimental as you get. The 7 innings DH, you have to cram a lot of games in to a short period of time. So, you guys can chime in on that. But that's what Don Mattingly had to say about the 7
I mean, there's strategy to the 7 inning. Like, I know there was a little controversy that Jacob deGrom started 2 nights ago in a 9 inning. I'm sorry, last night in a 9 inning game, as opposed to the doubleheader the day before, where maybe he could have pitched one of the 7 inning games and it wouldn't have gone to the bullpen. So it's almost another thing of strategy for this year, where a team could put their ace in one of the doubleheader games. Because a lot of teams are going to be playing a lot of doubleheaders from here on in, and you get your ace in one of those games, and they can pretty much throw a complete game. And if you don't have that much confidence in your bullpen, that's huge. So for this year, at least, it's a whole other strategy. But one thing I wanted to ask you, Greg, so the Mets right now, there's been a little bit of a disappointment in the record, and, they're not a playoff team if the season ended today. When this season is over, for better or for worse, how much credence do you think management will put in as far as personnel decisions, coaching decisions, the manager? How important is this season, or do they just give everybody a pass and they start over next year?
I think it depends on the player, the stage of the career the player is at. I think just as an example of the Mets, somebody like Wilson Ramos, who I think is on the last year of his contract.
Yeah, he is.
A terrific hitter last year, but he's not been a terrific hitter this year. Had a big RBI last night, but for the most part, looks a lot older, shall we say. I think it's hard to come back from that, even if it's only a 60 game in the catcher's case, probably more like a 40, 45 game sample, and say, well, we'll give you a mulligan. On the other hand, Ned Rosario, still a young guy, having a really bad start compared to how well he played in the second half last year. Do you just say, well, this was bizarre circumstances? Or do you say, well, you know what, we've got Andres Gimenez signed, and maybe we think about trading Rosario? I think we would, the way I would go about it is, go easy on it. It was only, 45, 50, 60 games, unless you saw something terribly disturbing. I think for the most part, I think you kind of have to, take everything with a pound of salt, never mind a grain, not make too many hasty moves. If somebody has improved a great deal, and you think that's, a trajectory you're on, great, go with that. But if somebody has kind of fallen off, as we've discussed here, maybe you say, okay, this was not the season on which to be making far-ranging personnel decisions. So I guess benefit of the doubt is a strong phrase here. And I'd be willing to give a lot of players, depending where they are in their career. I mean, more than the Rosario end of things and say the Ramos end of things, just to use those two guys as an example. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Say, okay, if we liked you coming into 2020 and we liked the way you applied yourself but the results weren't there, well, we still believe in you. And we hope you'll get it together. We'll work with you. But if you're just saying, my God, like this guy totally lost it, it's kind of hard to say, okay, well, try it again next year. But, I think it's, an individual by individual case, just like it would be in a year.
Now, in 2021, let's assume by the beginning of that year, the Mets have new ownership. If that's the case, will the GM and manager be the same?
Well, first, let me put down my champagne. Yeah, new ownership, and the idea that 2021 will start on time and be a regular season. That is up to this prospective, hypothetical, maybe not so hypothetical new owner. The only real precedent we have here, and precedent is kind of a dangerous thing because it's a long time ago in this case, 40 years ago, new owners came in to Flushing, and they brought in a new general manager right away, and they let the manager kind of work his way through his contract. That was back in the days of Frank Ashton and Joe Torre. It was a long time ago. I suppose some of that will depend on how the last month or so of this season plays out, assuming it all plays out. That if Brody Van Wagenen is impressing people with the roster he's put together, and by people, I suppose I mean the owner, and whoever the owner listens to, then Brody Van Wagenen will be back. Putting Brody Van Wagenen aside, because I think that's a complex issue, I think it's hard to judge Louis Rojas on more than, a little bit more than an incomplete grade at this point. A guy who hadn't, there was no clue he was going to be the manager when the calendar year began. He got partway through his spring training, had it halted like everything else in baseball, and has had about a month to show his stuff, whether on the field or in the clubhouse or all the ways that those things manifest themselves. So, I think if you're going to be fair, and, again, the new owner is under no obligation to be fair, you'd say, okay, well, this guy's been in the organization, Louis Rojas, quite a while. He's in a new position. Maybe they didn't make the playoffs this year. Maybe they snuck in and got knocked out in the first round. Well, he's a young guy. Baseball people seem to like him. We'll give him another shot. Brody Van Wagenen, I think, was a very specific choice by Jeff Wilpon. Kind of a player whisperer, given his background as an agent and certain of his clients being Mets. I don't know necessarily that Jacob deGrom would have re-signed as smoothly as he did if his former agent wasn't the GM, or maybe he would have eventually, but he would have played the market, or maybe he would have become Zach Wheeler a year later. I don't know. So, what we saw today, and again, it's a little murky because, as you guys probably know, Brody Van Wagenen was caught on a hot mic, kind of excoriating the commissioner for kind of getting in the way of what the Mets and Marlins were planning, and then he kind of backpedaled and said, it wasn't the commissioner, I misunderstood, it was Jeff Wilpon, in which case he's kind of laying somebody out doing what he believes was improper. But, the fact that he wanted to support the players, that this may be a good sign in what I think in sports in general, becoming a little more of a player-centric league, maybe following in the footsteps of the NBA. It may not be a bad thing to have a guy who relates to the players, especially as I guess we're coming up against, collective bargaining agreement time. And maybe you don't necessarily want for lack of a better phrase, a management hothead or somebody like that. Again, I'm trying to look at this from various angles. And he's still the guy who traded Jared Kelenic for Robinson Cano and Edwin Diaz, and that's still hard to look past. And that's the recognizing that Robinson Cano, I think, brings certain positives to this team as a veteran, as a leader, as a guy who can still hit. I think to a certain degree, I'm more pro Robinson Cano than I was probably Stu and me talking last year. But he's, not a long-term solution. And we don't know what Jared Kelenic is, but that's, I think Mets fans have been through that. Maybe Brody Van Wagenen deserves to be looked at for more than just that.
I don't fault him for that trade because at the time of the deal, I know they had to take Cano's contract, but they were getting an Edwin Diaz, a guy who had a great season for Seattle in 2018. So there was definitely an upside for the Mets. And when you deal with minor leaguers, it's a crapshoot. You don't know if they're going to pan out. A lot of them don't. So sometimes you get unlucky. I mean, to me, traditionally, like any trade the Mets have made going back, at the time of the trade, the only trade I could think of to me, and I was a kid, that made no sense was the Rusty Staub for Mickey Lova's trade.
Oh, what a shame.
Because at the time, because the Mets were a pitching strong team, and they probably needed an extra hitter, so they're trading their best hitter, and they're getting, another pitcher who was really on the downside. Even the Nolan Ryan trade, they were banking on Fregosi going back to his 1970 form. He had an off year in 71, and the trade was made after that year. And there was probably the feeling in the organization that Ryan was never going to be successful in New York. And they felt that they can finally solve their problems at third base. Maybe this work, obviously it failed miserably. Sometimes with a trade, if you see an upside when they make it, you look at it at the time they make it, and you see a positive, then it's okay. And with the Cano trade, I did see a positive. I thought, Cano maybe still had a couple of good years left hitting, and they were getting a shutdown closer. Who would have figured what would have happened, the way it turned out?
I think, Diaz seems to be the, quote, the smart money in that trade at the time it happened. Just not to take us back to 44 years, or we'll be here all night. I think the Rusty Staub for Mickey Rose was a matter of personal pique. Then Donald Grant was not crazy about Rusty Staub. I don't think Rusty Staub was crazy about Donald Grant at the time. And he wanted to make a trade before Staub had the chance to veto it. And I'm with you, by the way. I don't think it was crazy trading Nolan Ryan, knowing what we knew then. I'm old enough to remember Nolan Ryan as a Met. I thought it was kind of weird that you wanted to take a shortstop and stick him to third base, but that I'm not blaming on Brody Van Wagenen or nor the Lolich deal. But I think Brody was probably looking at Cano, and Cano is the win now piece. Diaz as the let's keep winning piece, because they had him under control for 4 years when they got him, and Kelnick, as the unknown who he didn't draft. So, if you are a new general manager, new to your craft, certainly not new to baseball, but you're looking to make a splash, you probably, especially in New York, especially with these owners, the ones we still have, you want to win now. I mean, who doesn't want to win now, I suppose, but I think there was just always this feeling, probably on Van Wagenen's part, on Jeff Wilpalm's part, that we're probably closer than they really were going into 2019. So you kind of roll the dice. And again, I think Cano is a very important part of this team. From when you've listened to so many of the young players reference him as kind of an on-field coach almost, and a counselor. And that's all great stuff, but after a while you say, well, isn't he also 37, 38 years old and slowing down? And again, the DH has been a godsend for being able to use Cano. So again, but just to finally say, it's up to the owner, and I won't. If the owner comes in, whoever he is or she comes in and says, you know what, we're cleaning house here and getting a new general manager, I won't be able to blame that person. Nor would I say that they're wrong to say, you know what, Brody Van Wagenen started something and we want to see him through.
Let me give you one of the ultimate win-now situations and that haunts the Detroit Tigers and all of us back home. 1987, John Smoltz for Doyle Alexander. How did that work out? My goodness, you talk about a short-term trade and a long-term. How did it work out? The Tigers got early returns off of Doyle Alexander. He gets them to the playoffs. He's practically unbeatable, and everybody knows what John Smoltz, how that turned out for Atlanta. So I can appreciate where you guys are coming from, but there's your ultimate win now.
Oh, sure. Well, it was mirrored 3 years later when the Red Sox trade Jeff Bagwell for Larry Anderson.
Oh, yeah.
But, in both, you know what, though? I always think back on those two trades as not totally unreasonable, because in those days you had to win the division. And winning the division was not a given the way it seemed to have become for certain teams. And, you don't want to give up a guy, especially in Smoltz's case, a kid from Michigan who's going to go out and have a 20-year plus Hall of Fame career while Doyle Alexander is retired. And you didn't end up winning in the playoffs anyway that year, and ditto for Larry Anderson vis-a-vis Jeff Bagwell. But I think, that is one of those things now versus later. It got you into the playoffs if you're the Tigers or the Red Sox in those respective cases, and, the chips fall where they may. I mean, I think we as fans always wish that every trade is just lopsided, and it looks good the day it's made, and it looks even better a year, 5 years, 10 years, and for the rest of our lives later. But, as long as players will move and you're willing to move them, that's all the possibilities are out there.
Well, in a year right now where we've seen the unprecedented and everything on the planet, one thing we were able to see a few days ago was that brilliant masterpiece by Lucas Giolito, the 9-inning no-hitter, 13 strikeouts and 1 walk, complete game. How refreshing was it that we saw a taste? That's the one thing you can't put an asterisk next to this year, at least, a 9-inning complete game no-hitter, 13 strikeouts, and 1 walk for the Chicago White Sox.
That's real pitching.
Right, exactly.
That would go well in any season. Although I have to say, the one thing struck me when I heard the radio call, the White Sox announcer, he's very excited, which he ought to be, and I hear the crowd cheering, as you would expect, and I realize there's no crowd there because they had the sound effects that guaranteed rate filled, if that's what it's called this year, pumped up. And, I understand. You want to score these moments as if, you're cueing the orchestra at a Broadway play or something. But I was just thinking, how could you take something so genuine and tart it up that way? But that's not to take away from the accomplishment itself. I tell you, I enjoy seeing great pitching in this atmosphere. Does seem more, for lack of a word, normal than watching the home runs fly. I don't know if there's any atmospheric condition to the fact that there's nobody in the ballpark and the ball seems to be flying further, but suddenly it just feels like batting practice in the middle of the game when, Ronald Acuna or whoever hits a ball 468 feet. And I know balls have been flying out of ballparks last year, but it seems a little more artificial just because there's nothing holding it back. Maybe because you don't have 30,000 people in the ballpark. But, it does seem like a season of extremes, doesn't it? Either you have these really long home runs and these large scores, or you have these 13 strikeouts, 14 strikeout type of games. But you don't get a no-hitter every night. And it was refreshing to see not only a no-hitter, but as you said, a 9-inning no-hitter.
Right.
Just like Grandpa used to throw.
Right. and for the Chicago White Sox, wherever it's worth, I think it's the 19th no-hitter in their history, so that's incredible, too. They're no stranger to the no-no wars. Go ahead, Stu.
So, two of the bigger stories for the Mets this year were Yoenis Cespedes and Marcus Stroman opting out. What were your feelings as to their reasons? Do you believe they were concerned health-wise, or do you think, as a lot of people do, that there may have been some ulterior motives for both of them?
I think you have to give everybody the benefit of the doubt in this atmosphere. Somebody is going to walk away from the profession that they have worked at all their lives, forfeit a certain amount of money. I mean, there are contractual concerns down the road, and maybe you can look at it from that angle and say, well, maybe Marcus Stroman wanted to wait until he had a service time, he'd become a free agent and say, well, I can do without this for 2 months. But you don't want to get on an airplane, and you don't want to go to a hotspot where COVID is going on, and you do have family members, as apparently Cespedes does, who are, exposure to this is compromising. I'm going to say, go forth and be well. And thank you for your service, so to speak. I was kind of disappointed at the way Yoenis Cespedes was kind of tossed by the side of the road by a reasonably large sampling of Mets fans. I mean, this guy got us into the World Series. He certainly got us into the postseason in 2015. The only real success we've had for more than a decade now was when Cespedes was healthy and hitting, which was 2015 and 2016. And I understand that he did not go out in style. but whatever the story was there exactly, because I think that's a little murky as well. But, if he didn't tell anybody, that's bad form, and I could see that being up for criticism. But I think, you know what, I think with Yoenis Cespedes, there was always this international man of mystery aura about him, and you kind of took what you got as part of the package. And I never expected to see him play again as it was. After he missed his last year, after the bore attacks him, after everything else. And in fact, if they hadn't stuck the DH in the National League, we would have just been saying, well, Yoenis Cespedes is still getting paid on his ranch and we'll never see him again. Said we got, 2 home runs, one very dramatic on opening day, and this bizarre ending to what was shall we say, an unorthodox Met career. But, I'll always have a bond association with Yoenis Cespedes for the rest of my life based on, the summer of 2015 and what he did in 2016. And really, anytime he just kind of seems to show up and magically hit a home run. Stroman, I never felt I got to know that well as a fan. I mean, he had 11 starts last year. It was kind of a brassy move to go and get him. Again, giving up prospects, and, Long Island kid, you figure he wanted to be here, said all the right things, had bad injury luck, and just, in a moment of truth in terms of, wanting to opt out for health reasons, for family reasons. And I can only say, again, that I hope he's well, hope his family is well, and I would not assume that the Mets would be chasing him as a free agent next year, but, you never know, I guess. But, I don't know. A lot of players have opted out on a lot of teams. It just seems like with the Mets, there always seems to be something kind of bubbling beneath the surface, and nothing ever seems as it is exactly. But, for me personally as a fan, all I can say is thank you for pitching, thank you for hitting, and I hope you guys do okay.
Greg, before we wrap things up, I just want you to tell everyone how your blog, Faith and Fear in Flushing, got started.
Faith and Fear in Flushing, now in its 16th season, and I really couldn't say that until July 24th, but we started in 2005. Me and a very good friend of mine named Jason Fry had met online back in the old AOL days on a Nets message board, and we got to know each other that way, and we met in real life and went to a lot of games, sent each other a lot of emails, and decided it would be fun to start a blog right around the time I think a lot of people were starting blogs, right at the dawn of the Carlos Beltran era, Willie Randolph coming in as manager, Armand and I coming in as GM. So that always sticks in my mind as it was kind of a propitious time that the Mets were on the rise, and here we were to chronicle it. And we've been at it ever since, writing up every game and doing a lot of historical pieces as well. And, we call ourselves the blog for Mets fans who like to read, because we like to write. And we were not necessarily under any kind of word count limit. And, we like to write about what it's like being fans. In years that there are games to go to, what it's like going to games, what it's like to watch them on TV and to sit up late at night and think about it, and to replay, games where you wish Kenny Rogers hadn't come in. He wasn't winning with the score tied and things like that. And hopefully some, more positive things as well. So, that's faithandfearinflushing.com. We're here all year.
In all the years that you were going to games, what is the one game that you saw in person that, your favorite, the one that you never forget, you going to a game?
I would say that it was game 162 of 1999. The last regularly scheduled home game of the 20th century at Shea Stadium. The Mets and the Reds were tied going into the final day for the final playoff spot in the National League. It was one of those, the Mets have their destiny in their own hands, which is like the last place you want it, because you just don't really trust the Mets to keep it in their hands. But that day, played a very tense game against the Pirates. It was 1-1 in the ninth inning, and Melvin Moore singles to lead off the inning. Edgardo Alfonso singles into third. Melvin Moore had done basically nothing up to that point in his major league career. He had been on the bench, just had entered the game as a pinch runner for that matter. One thing leads to another. The bases are loaded. Mike Piazza steps up, who is there to be the big man in situations like this. And just because it's baseball, instead of Mike Piazza having the big swing, Brad Quantz of the Pirates throws a wild pitch. Melvin Moore runs down the line, scores. Mike Piazza's down there looking dazed, and 50,000 people, including myself, realize, oh my God, our season is not over. No, we hadn't clinched anything yet, but we had let a chance the division slip away. We had a 7-game losing streak. Now the wild card was getting away, on top of the fact the year before something similar had happened. So there were all kinds of emotions that season and that month, and it was this feeling of, my God, the Mets did what we needed them to do. And there was more to come, because they had a 1-game playoff the next night in Cincinnati that they won. They had this amazing series against Arizona, which I was fortunate to be at when Todd Pratt hits the home run to win that series. And then the Grand Slam single series. I was not at that game, but I was at that series for at least one of the games. So, that was the most magical time, I think. And, I go back to 1969. I was a little kid in 69, going to games in 73. But by 99, I'm an adult. I have the agency to go to pretty much as many games as I like. I lots of people to go to games with. I've gotten my wife interested in baseball. She was with me that day at the Melvin Moore game, as I call it. So that's the one, and that period, I think, is the one, even more so. Again, I wasn't there for the ball going through Bill Buckner's legs, but even more so than 1986 and a lot of other great years. I think that is the time frame that meant the most to me, and the game that I attended that meant the most to me. But I've been, happy to keep going to games to see if maybe I'll get a better one someday.
I want to add a few things here. First of all, I'm going to stay on the remote broadcasters for a moment, since I obviously am one. Okay. The one thing that intrigues me is, obviously, I'm wondering down the road, will they ever continue doing it to cut down on travel expenses, is what really intrigues me a little bit. Knowing that we've seen here, again, this could be a one and done year, but again, you guys have stated throughout the whole broadcast, is an experimental year. Any thoughts about that?
I think money saving is a big deal to these networks. I think we've already begun to see it with some college basketball games, and I think some college football games, but before all of this, and maybe I didn't watch the broadcast, so I don't know how effective they were. I mean, and who knows? Maybe a regional sports network like SNY says, you know what, guys, this is this trip to Colorado isn't that big a deal. Why don't you just do it in the studio?
Right.
We know how to do that now. I hate to see it come to that, because I think there's. Again, as I was saying before, I think we see the difference between the broadcasters being kind of plugged into what the team is doing and thinking, and all those little notes that make a season. Because the game is great. The baseball that you turn on at 7 o'clock or 1 o'clock or whatever time the first pitch is great, but the reason that we get so wrapped up in it is that it's a story. It's a 162 game long story most years, and it's 162 game stories within the larger story. And we love getting the little bits of information. I'm not even talking about gossip, just the insights. What Michael Conforto is doing differently. What's on J.D. Davis's mind? Why things are working out better or worse for Jeff McNeil. And I think you get that because, the broadcasters for the most part are diligent, that they consider themselves reporters, that they approach it that way, that baseball is a very talkative sport. I've had my moments as working press in baseball, and I just see how much people love to talk, and people always kind of like to look, around, make sure nobody's listening, and say, "Well, listen, you can't repeat this to anybody." But which is why I wasn't at all surprised by what happened with Dirty Van Wagenen today with the hot mic, because it's not state secrets. They like to treat it as it is, but it's not. It's baseball. It's fun. We love to talk about these things. It's a sport that gives itself over to legend and lore, and it happens every day in a normal season that way. So by having, in the SNY's case, and having Steve Gelds on the road, and having Gary Cohn on the road, and having one or the other between Hernandez and Darling with them, and having the radio guys on the road, and by having that access in the clubhouse, which you're not getting this year, it just makes for a richer experience for the fan, for the viewer, and the listener, and all of that. So again, and in turn, if we're talking about it, whether just as fans, whether on broadcasts like this, whether on blogs like what I do, it's great publicity to the game. It makes it more interesting for everybody. It makes you want to tune in again tomorrow. I think right now, the sterility is kind of what's painful to get through. It's like watching through a plexiglass window. And I say that even understanding that I'm watching on television to begin with. But I think any distance that can be torn down is a good thing. And so, if they save a few bucks here and there by not putting technicians and cameramen and whoever on a plane in addition to broadcasters, I think you lose a lot. I think you lose a lot in your product. And I'm sure, they can make it look presentable.
Right. And
it'll pass muster. But at the end of the night, it just won't feel the same. And I think that takes a toll over time. But, over time, we've seen, we've seen happen to the Daily News, just as an example, in New York, which is already a shell of itself over these last few years. They even have a newsroom now, and that was something impossible to consider. A newspaper without a physical newsroom, let alone a substantive physical edition. But it happens, so I wouldn't be surprised. It may not be universal. I think in your markets where it really matters, it won't happen, but in other markets where baseball is just another product, perhaps they say, well, you know what, we're not going to send you guys on the road in September because we have other things to show, or we're not doing it in April because our the NBA team takes priority on our regional sports network.
Right.
So there's just that. Yeah, I think again the economics of it are probably going to play more of it than the aesthetic concerns, and I think that'll be sad, but it's maybe reality.
I have a few other key points I want to address while we have the opportunity. Obviously, we're seeing an abundance of protests. Okay, Milwaukee's Lorenzo Cain was asked what he thought Jackie Robinson would think of what is going on regarding social injustice in today's society, and he says on a Zoom call that I think he would be amazed at the lack of progress, the fact that I'm on a Zoom call and talking about this in 2020. I don't see the progress. It's almost like going backwards. So let's talk about the protests. Are these actually doing the job? Are they effective?
Well, we're talking about it. We're talking about the issues, or at least we're alluding to them. Players are being asked about them. Again, I don't think any player gets into baseball or whatever sport to have to be a spokesman for an entire community or to address the topics of the day, but it kind of comes with the territory after a while, kind of, speaks to what we kind of lay on sports and the people in it, being public figures and all. It's hard to say if there's an effect after, 24 hours of, one slate of games postponed or canceled and, a number of well-meaning gestures taken. And kind of to go back what we were saying at the beginning here, again, although sports weren't really in season back in early June when the protests around the murder of George Floyd were going on, it feels like, we just went through something a lot like this because we did. And the fact that Black Lives Matter is a phrase that has to keep resonating anew I guess it was 6 years ago where it came to the general consciousness, and maybe it didn't convince enough people that their lives didn't have to explain that certain lives matter. It's got to be tough to be, it's got to be tough to be Dom Smith, just to put it in a Mets context. We saw, his reaction and his eloquence. I'm sure he'd rather just know that he could, play ball, get dressed, get in his car, go home, and not worry about anything happening. Same as, sure, Michael Conforto does that and goes home. So, it's, I don't know what Jackie Robinson would think. Probably the things were not where he would have wished they'd be almost 50 years after his passing. So I can't, I was going to say I can't blame. I guess I should say I applaud these guys for doing what they feel they have to do. At the end of the day, we love baseball, but it's just a game. And this is people's lives that you have the opportunity to take a stand, to make a statement for one day that might get somebody's attention, that might get somebody to think, hey, I never realized it was that tough. That maybe we need change in this country that I hadn't considered. Great. And if not, maybe there's another day to be taken. But, maybe people who are in positions to do something about it need to do more about it. Maybe the rest of us need to do more about it. So
well, amazingly enough,
as if we didn't have enough proof that sports doesn't exist in a vacuum in 2020. I guess that's, from our perspective as people who just love to watch the games, sports doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah, amazingly enough, you segued to my point about Dom Smith kneeling. I give the kid a lot of credit for expressing himself. Kneeling, obviously, we're seeing more of it, but a few years ago, after Colin Kaepernick did it, I think there was one player, I think, was it Maxwell, that did it, and everybody looked down on the guy. But now Dom Smith kneeling. What are your thoughts about Dom Smith kneeling?
It was just, it seemed to be it's not exactly spontaneous because you obviously had to put a little bit of thought into it.
Right.
The kneeling, again, we sort of like, we've been here before, and I think we almost, maybe because we're sports fans and we just want to get to the next game, it sort of feels like, okay, you did that. Now what? Right. Well, maybe somebody had to go do it again. And, it became a far more loaded issue than I ever would have dreamed when Colin Kaepernick did it the first time. And people read a lot of symbolism into it that I don't think was ever intended. And, I guess when the George Floyd protests happened and Joey Votto came out and said, I always thought that it was somehow, it was wrong to take a knee, but now I kind of understand what's going on. And so, one knee on one night, it felt like the right thing to do. Personally, I would have loved, I don't know to what extent it was discussed. I mean, Dominic said it wasn't really discussed at all. Someone who did. I'm sorry that he was out there alone. It was nice to see the whole team come together tonight, as they did. Both teams come together in this way. I'm not going to, if somebody, listen, if you want to play the national anthem and stand there, arrow straight, hand on your heart, because that's what it means to you, I think that's great too. That's what it means to you. If it means, I have to make a statement about my country and how people are treated, how I feel I might be treated, because even though I'm a professional athlete and a law-abiding citizen, I'm a black guy who might get pulled over, I might get shot, and somehow it's cathartic to take a knee and call attention. I think that's great too.
All right, let me.
And, you know what? If they want to play baseball and not drape it in all kinds of ceremony, I think that would be fine too sometimes. And just say play ball without bringing out the flag and everything else. But it is part of tradition. So I don't got a problem with it. That's the question.
I mean, it's hard for us to really know what's going through these guys' minds and their mindset, because we've never been through it. And you have to realize a lot of these athletes, they didn't grow up with money. You know, they grew up, maybe they were poor or middle class, and they were like, they could have been discriminated against in certain ways that we know nothing about. And now they're in a position where their actions are seen and heard by many more people than they were before, and they want to make a difference. But I mean, for me, you know, I can't relate. You know, I've never had an issue with the law because of my, you know, the color of my skin. I've never had, you know, any of the things that these guys and women as well have gone through in life. So it's hard for me to say they're doing the wrong thing. You have to do what's in your heart, ultimately.
And you have to remember, well, I'm sorry, just the one other thing that gets me is it's baseball. And baseball, you know, when we were all growing up, I think we were used to a lot of black players and black superstars. And now these players are an utter minority in their clubhouses and on their teams and in their sports. So it's probably even tougher to break through. And I think if that's what I, you know, got from listening to the several players who spoke tonight after they canceled the game or postponed the game. I don't think, you know, again, I don't know what it was in everybody's heart, but I'm going to guess that some of these players, you know, Brandon Nimmo grew up in Wyoming. Not to generalize or stereotype, but probably doesn't have a lot of background. With a guy like Dom Smith who grew up in Los Angeles. And maybe there's just, it takes time and openness and honesty in close quarters to everybody to understand where everybody's coming from. So I think that makes it just, you know, again, a lot of, and it's weird to even talk in these terms because I think we all probably grew up at a time where the ideal was we all want a colorblind society and we all want everybody to have the same opportunity and, well, look at all these guys working together on the floor, on the field, on the courts. But, you know, the reality is it hasn't worked that way. So there are differences that have to be broached. And it is strange when you step back and look at baseball versus, you know, the baseball that we grew up with of so many black players, not just black superstars, but it was just a more integrated sport. And just for myriad reasons, it's evolved in a way where black players, partly for socioeconomic reasons, because it's an expensive sport to play versus some others, fall away from the game. So you get Dominic Smith walking into a situation where there's one or two other African-American players and everybody else is white or Latino. And it probably, we would love to believe it doesn't make a difference, but it must. And like you said, Stu, we don't know what it feels like. So there are a lot of factors at play, and for it to bubble to the surface, I'm sorry it came to the surface the way it did because somebody was shot and more than one person. But, you always wish that these things have a positive outcome eventually, and that, the journey keeps being forward and not being pulled backwards. And I hope that's, what comes of this.
All right, let me give you one of my 162nd game story, then we'll wrap it on a Mets note that I know Stuart will definitely get into. I remember down at Marlins Park when Henderson Alvarez threw a no-hitter against the Detroit Tigers, and at that time, the Mets finished 62-100, and the Tigers are going to the playoffs. So that was the only real live no-hitter I've seen face-to-face. Again, the Marlins I work with now against the Tigers who I grew up and loved. So just thought I'd throw that out there. And now, since it's been a predominantly Mets show, I don't know if Stuart's told you, but we had Ron Swoboda on a broadcast, right, Stuart? And why don't you give him the gist of what you were able to gain out of that interaction with Ron, and then we'll wrap it up.
The one thing that he had said, and he was very forthcoming about it, was he regretted the relationship he had with Gil Hodges, and he felt that was his fault, that it wasn't a good relationship. Ron had felt he wasn't playing enough, and, Hodges was set in all his platoons, and Ron said he was very difficult towards him, which ended up him getting traded a year after they won the championship. And he said that was a regret of his. his relationship with Hodges.
It's a shame they didn't have more time together. I know Juan was traded before Hodges' last season, and it's always striking to me that I know in real time, shall we say, there were a number of players who kind of chafed under Gil Hodges' management style, and to a man, all these years later, they said things like Ron Swoboda said to you, that, they were the immature ones. I don't think they're just saying it to speak well of the departed, that, Gil Hodges was a once-in-a-lifetime figure where managers were concerned, certainly where the Mets were concerned. And, to be fair, Ron Swoboda was a once-in-a-lifetime figure, one of my first favorite players. So, nice job having him on.
Yeah, well, you know what? I've had him on a couple of shows before, and I've gotten to know him through social media. So when the opportunity presented itself to bring Stuart and Ron on together, I worked diligently to get it done. But I was really glad to do it because Ron's a real super guy. And I'll tell you what, talk about his post-career. He had a fine career as a broadcaster as well, working in different markets, ranging from New York to New Orleans and Milwaukee. So just thought I'd put that out there since we've talked a lot about the Mets. So with that said, as we wrap up the broadcast, Greg, with everybody, we'd like to let everyone know how they can get a hold of you and what you want to promote for yourself. Stuart, you go next. I'll wrap it up and then go over a couple more company things. All right? Go ahead, Greg. You lead it off.
Sure. You can find my writing on faithandfearandflushing.com. Like I said, the blog for Mets fans who like to read, which I co-authored with my friend Jason Fry. I've got a few books out there. Go to Amazon or wherever. Type in Greg Prince Mets. You'll probably find them. But just very, very briefly, one called Faith and Fear and Flushing, kind of a fan's memoir through the closing of Shea and the opening of Citi Field, starting really with the beginning of the franchise. A book about the 2015 Mets who went to the World Series called Amazing Again, a book about the phenomenon of Mike Piazza called Piazza, and one called The Happiest Recap, some of the greatest games in Mets history from their early years. So if anybody's interested, and I'm on Twitter at Greg_Prince. Happy to see you there. And thank you very much for the opportunity to come on and talk baseball.
Oh, it's our pleasure. All right, Stuart, you know the drill.
All right, so I'm Stuart Hack, the one person tonight that did not attend the University of South Florida with Hack Tax and Accounting Services in Wellington, Florida. That's Palm Beach County. We specialize in the 7-page tax returns just for 2020 only. And then we'll go back to the regular stuff. But seriously, do taxes and accounting work, individuals, small businesses, not-for-profits. On Twitter, HackTax1. Catch my Facebook page, Hack Tax and Accounting Services, LLC. And on the web, www.hacktaxandaccounting.com.
Well, how about that, Greg? This has been a good week for my USF cronies. I had Joe Giussandi on earlier in the week. We talked about sports media. Now to have you, a fellow Bull, on the broadcast with a Bull like myself. What year did you graduate?
I was class of 85. Same year as Charlie Bradley, if that means anything.
It means everything.
Greatest basketball player of his time at USF.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a football team back then, but we went to the NITs a couple of times. Yeah. And I was on the Oracle, if that means anything to you.
Oh, yeah. Hey, listen, I know about the Oracle. Never wrote for him. Lee Rose was the coach. I graduated in 86, and I got to know Charlie Bradley well. I graduated in 1986. Yeah. My goodness, who knows if our paths would have crossed, wouldn't have known. Well, at least we get to
and my son is a junior at USF as we speak.
There you go. That's all right. And the University of South Florida, our alma mater, Greg, is a media distribution partner for the South Florida Tribune. Not that that's a hard thing to figure out. I'm going to publish my Bulls all day long. So all right. Well, in terms of how about that? 2 Bulls tonight, and we had 2 Bulls on Tuesday night. What a beautiful thing for the University of South Florida. In terms
of
I'm holding the horns as we speak. The 2 fingers.
In terms of how to get 108 Stitches baseball talk, You can find this broadcast on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Since I talk fast, I'll say it again. Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. In terms of getting a hold of us, you can find us at Twitter, on Twitter at Tribune South. That's the @ Tribune South. Facebook, please like our page, South Florida Tribune. Instagram, South Florida Tribune gets it done. I have a YouTube channel. Maybe one of these days, the three of us can do a broadcast via that way. To do so, we'll do it through South Florida Tribune. Our website is www.southfloridatribune.com. We'll have all the broadcasts on there. Our media distribution partners provide us with content as well as columnists. And as I mentioned, the broadcasts are there. And you can email me at southfloridatribune@gmail.com and connect with me on LinkedIn, Scott Morgan. So guys, Stuart, Greg, it's been an absolute pleasure talking baseball with you. When I see the connections here between USF, and I'll tell you one thing I will say in closing here is I've enjoyed working with the Mets people. Jay Horowitz, one of the nicest guys on the planet, and I've always enjoyed going up to St. Lucie to see the Mets. They've always been very cooperative with me, so I have the utmost respect for everything about that organization. They've really treated me well. So, any closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
Nope.
Maybe this season come to a conclusion, and maybe have something resembling a postseason.
Yeah, well, like I said, you know what, Greg, when you talked about the Korea Baseball Organization, you really got my wheels turning in terms of the fact that the probability of having a season could be done without fans. So being a baseball person like we all are, I think we could all appreciate baseball from every level. So with that said, on behalf of Greg Prince and Stuart Hack, my name is Scott Morgan, Roth the Motor City Madmouth. Thank you for joining us on this edition of 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. Good night. Have a great weekend, and mask up and do all the safety things necessary to keep COVID away from us. Good night, everybody.